People say corporate loyalty in America is dead, but it is really just a toxic liability. When my boss slid my termination papers across the mahogany table to save a few dollars, he thought he was cutting dead weight. He had no idea he had just severed his only parachute before jumping out of an airplane. I did not warn him or cry. I simply smiled, packed my desk, and calmly waited for gravity to do its job. Hello to all our wonderful listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for your continuous support. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with zero operating budget, which means we are forced to pause all future public uploads for the time being and transition entirely to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story, please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon family to hear even more incredible, exclusive true stories with longer runtimes, deeper details, and multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot share on YouTube. You can join right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the Patreon link in the video description or pinned comment. Let us dive straight into today's story, told from the perspective of our main character, Chloe Peterson. I was 38 years old and had spent the last 11 years of my life building the digital nervous system of Aerovax's Solutions, a highly profitable medical transport company based in Chicago. I was the chief architect of their cold chain logistics network. That meant my code ensured highly sensitive shipments, like experimental vaccines, transplant organs, and rare biotherapeutics, did not spoil while in transit across the country. It was a grueling job with absolutely zero margin for error. A single degree of temperature variance could destroy millions of dollars in medical supplies and ruin lives. Yet, at precisely 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, I found myself sitting in a sterile, glass-walled conference room, staring at my direct supervisor, Marcus. Marcus was a young, aggressively ambitious manager who had been promoted just a few months prior. A rapid ascent made possible entirely due to his family connections with the corporate board of directors. He wore expensive, tailored suits that did not quite fit his arrogant posture and possessed a level of unearned confidence that only nepotism could buy. Sitting quietly next to him was a stone-faced representative from Human Resources, holding a thick manila folder. "Chloe, we appreciate your 11 years of dedicated service to this company," Marcus began, folding his hands on the polished mahogany table. His tone was heavily rehearsed, entirely devoid of genuine empathy, sounding exactly like a corporate training video. But the company is moving in a much more agile direction. We are implementing an artificial intelligence restructuring initiative across the entire IT department to streamline operations. Unfortunately, as a result of these strategic changes, your position is being eliminated effective immediately. This move will save the logistics department roughly 45% in personnel overhead. Artificial intelligence restructuring. It was a beautiful corporate buzzword, but it was an absolute lie. I did not need a machine learning algorithm to tell me the truth. I knew exactly what Marcus was doing behind the scenes. For several weeks, he had been taking private, off-the-books lunches with an old college buddy who had recently launched a flashy, bargain bin software startup. Marcus had secretly pushed through a contract to replace my custom-built, military-grade temperature security platform with his friend's cheap, off-the-shelf application. He desperately wanted to cut operational costs, look like a financial genius to the executive board, and likely secure a nice kickback under the table for throwing the contract to his friend. I looked down at the severance paperwork slid in front of me. It was a spectacularly meager offering, barely enough to cover 3 months of rent in downtown Chicago. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not waste my breath defending my 11 years of flawless performance and countless late nights. The Human Resources representative slid a separate, strictly worded document toward me. "We need you to hand over all master root keys, server passwords, and administrative access to the network immediately. Company policy dictates a complete and instant transfer of all security credentials upon termination. Normally, when an elite systems architect who built the entire infrastructure of a company is abruptly fired, there is panic, anger, or at least a bitter negotiation for a transition period. Marcus clearly expected me to fight back. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, practically vibrating with the anticipation of asserting his dominance and putting me in my place. Instead, I reached into my leather bag, pulled out my company laptop, and opened it. I maintained an absolutely flawless mask of icy professionalism. "Of course," I said, my voice steady, calm, and perfectly polite. "I will transfer the supreme administrative rights directly to your account right now. Marcus." It took me exactly 3 minutes. I typed the command lines, rerouted the master server controls, and meticulously documented every single transfer of authority in the permanent system log, ensuring a pristine digital paper trail proved I had complied perfectly with their demands. I did not leave a hidden back door. I did not sabotage a single line of code. I handed him the keys to the castle, legally, cleanly, and without a single word of warning. "Done," I said, turning the laptop screen so the human resources representative could visually verify the transfer. "You are now the sole root administrator of the cold chain network, Marcus. The system is entirely yours." Marcus smirked, clearly disappointed that I had not given him a satisfying, dramatic reaction to feed his ego. He casually glanced at his luxury watch. "Great. Security will give you exactly 30 minutes to pack your desk. I suggest you do not linger in the building." I simply nodded, stood up, and walked out of the conference room. As I packed my small potted plants, my framed photos, and my favorite coffee mug into a standard cardboard box. The open plan office around me buzzed with the usual Friday afternoon energy. None of my colleagues knew I had just been fired. More importantly, no one knew that the intricate, highly sensitive bioencryption system keeping tens of millions of dollars of medical supplies safe was now in the hands of a man who barely understood how to troubleshoot a basic wireless router. When I finally walked out of the heavy glass doors of the Aerovaxis building and stepped into the brisk Chicago wind, I did not feel defeated or lost. I felt a strange, profound sense of relief. Marcus had fired me to save a few budget dollars, completely unaware that my complex, custom-coded system could not simply be run by a few superficial clicks on a dashboard. He wanted the ship all to himself, so I gave him the wheel. I just forgot to mention that the ocean was full of icebergs, and he was steering straight into the dark. That first weekend felt like exhaling a breath I had been holding for over a decade. I spent Saturday and Sunday wandering along the breezy shores of Lake Michigan and deep cleaning every room in my apartment. It was a bizarre, luxurious kind of freedom. For the first time in my professional life, I did not have to jolt awake in a cold sweat at 2 o'clock in the morning to patch a server leak or fix a routing error. However, my personal cell phone kept buzzing on the kitchen counter, in their blind rush to push me out the door on Friday. Human resources, and Marcus had completely forgotten to remove my personal email address from the secondary automated alert registry. Every few hours, my screen would light up with cryptic, automated subject lines, minor syntax errors, connection timeouts, the digital tremors before a massive earthquake. I simply watched the notifications stack up on my lock screen, made myself a cup of warm chamomile tea, and put the device on silent mode. By Monday morning, the real disaster began. While I was enjoying a leisurely breakfast, Marcus and his newly hired, budget-friendly tech team started tinkering with the foundational source code of the network. I knew exactly how they operated. To them, my complex, multi-layered security protocols looked like unnecessary frictions slowing down their daily metrics. They wanted to impress the executive board by drastically speeding up the shipping approval process. To achieve that artificial speed, they decided to bypass the heavy encryption checks. In their careless attempt to streamline the workflow, they blindly disabled the exclusive temperature sensor shield I had meticulously built over several years. They genuinely thought they were deleting obsolete code. In reality, they had just turned off the alarm system, the fire sprinklers, and the security cameras all at once, leaving the most vulnerable data entirely exposed. The timing of their incompetence could not have been worse. That very same morning, a massive, highly sensitive dispatch was scheduled for cross-country transit. We are not talking about basic bandages or over-the-counter painkillers. This was a dedicated fleet carrying experimental, highly volatile biological vaccines with a staggering valuation of $40 million. The cargo required absolute, unwavering thermal stability throughout the entire journey. If the ambient temperature inside the refrigerated transport containers fluctuated by even a fraction of a degree for more than a few minutes, the fragile molecular structure of the vaccines would degrade entirely, rendering the entire shipment completely useless. As the trucks rolled out of the distribution center, the newly crippled software began to quietly hemorrhage. The internal system was desperately trying to log critical temperature anomalies, spitting out raw, unformatted error codes. But because Marcus had replaced my custom dashboard with a cheaper interface, those warnings were buried deep in the back-end data logs. Nobody currently employed at Aerovaxis possessed the technical literacy required to read those raw hexadecimal warnings. Marcus, however, was determined to play the role of the visionary leader. He was obsessively monitoring the delivery timeline on his end, eager to prove that his new streamlined system was faster and more efficient than mine. When the dispatch software inevitably paused the shipment due to an unrecognized internal conflict, Marcus did not pause to investigate the root cause. He did not call a senior engineer to parse the dense error log. He simply saw a roadblock in his perfect, cost-saving narrative. Driven by pure arrogance and the desperate need to score immediate points with the higher-ups, he decided to manually bypass the safety protocols. He logged in with his newly acquired supreme administrative rights and confidently clicked the Master Override button. By doing so, he forced the software to greenlight the shipment, actively ordering the trucks to keep moving across state lines without a single functioning temperature sensor, protecting the priceless payload. At exactly 11:15 that morning, my phone vibrated with a frantic text message from an unregistered number. I recognized the nervous phrasing immediately. It was one of the junior engineering interns I used to mentor. The message read, "Marcus just broke the sensor firewall to force a dispatch. The raw data looks terrible. The entire cold chain network is crashing. What do I do?" For 11 years, my immediate instinct would have been to drop everything, remote into the server, and frantically rewrite the firewall rules to save the company from its own stupidity. My heart would have been pounding out of my chest, but sitting at my dining table, bathed in the soft morning sunlight, my heart rate remained perfectly steady. I read the panicked words on the screen one more time. A slow, quiet smirk spread across my face. I tapped the screen, permanently deleted the message, and closed my messaging application without typing a single word in response. Then, I opened my laptop, clicked on my resume, and calmly continued adjusting the formatting of my recent experience section. The bomb had officially been planted. The timer was ticking down to 0, and I was comfortably miles away from the blast radius. By the time Wednesday morning rolled around, the quiet tremors had evolved into a full-scale corporate earthquake. The fleet of refrigerated transport trucks finally arrived at the loading docks of our largest and most prestigious partner hospital on the East Coast. As standard protocol dictated, the hospital's receiving team did not just take the delivery driver's word for it. They pulled out their own independent, highly calibrated thermal scanners to verify the integrity of the cargo before signing the transfer of custody. The moment the laser hit the first pallet, the scanners lit up with glaring red warning indicators. The entire payload of experimental biological vaccines, valued at a staggering $40 million, had been exposed to severe temperature fluctuations during transit. The fragile molecular structures were completely cooked. The hospital immediately and rightfully rejected the entire delivery, refusing to take possession of a fleet full of medically useless, spoiled liquid. Back in Chicago, I could only imagine the sheer, unadulterated panic setting in behind the glass walls of the executive suite. Knowing Marcus, his first instinct was absolutely not to take accountability. His immediate survival strategy would have been to frantically search the database for a scapegoat. He surely tried to pull the raw telemetry data to prove that the trucking company had turned off the refrigeration units, hoping to shift the $40 million liability onto the transport drivers. But there was a fatal flaw in the bargain bin software he had purchased from his college friend. To save on expensive cloud storage costs, The new application was designed to automatically overwrite and wipe the original, unformatted temperature logs every 24 hours. By the time Marcus went digging for the evidence to save his own career, the system had already scrubbed itself clean. He had no data, no proof, and no one else to blame. At exactly 10:15 that morning, my cell phone rang. I looked down at the glowing screen. The caller ID boldly displayed the main corporate number for Aerovax's solutions. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow sip of my freshly brewed coffee, before swiping to answer. "Hello," I answered, my voice a perfect, flat monotone. "Hey, Chloe, it is Marcus," he said. The smug, rehearsed corporate tone from our Friday afternoon meeting was completely gone. In its place was a sickly sweet, hyper-casual rhythm, the kind of fake friendliness a person uses when they are drowning and need you to throw them a life preserver. "Hope you are having a great week so far. Listen, we are running into a tiny little snag with the dispatch interface, and we need you to help us with a little favor." A little favor? He had fired me to save face and budget, essentially throwing me out onto the street, and now he was calling me to fix the disaster he had manually triggered. "I am no longer an employee of Aerovax's, Marcus," I replied calmly. "My employment was terminated on Friday." I know, but this will only take you 5 minutes," Marcus pleaded, the desperation bleeding through his artificial smile. "I just need you to log into your old backdoor access portal and run a quick restoration command on the system logs from Monday. If you can just pull that data back up for me, I am willing to authorize a $1,000 corporate gift card for your trouble. Consider it a consulting bonus." I actually laughed out loud. It was not a mean laugh, just a genuine expression of absolute disbelief. He had just authorized the destruction of a $40 million medical shipment, and his grand solution was to bribe the senior architect he had just fired with a $1,000 gift card to perform illegal data extraction. "Marcus, listen to me very carefully," I said, my tone dropping to a deadly serious register. "You demanded my master keys on Friday, and I surrendered them. I do not have backdoor access. Even if I did, I am no longer on the company payroll. Unauthorized access to a highly secured medical database by a non-employee is a federal felony under cybersecurity laws. I am not risking federal prison for a gift card. Do not ever call this number again." I hung up the phone and set it face down on the counter. Exactly 20 minutes later, a new notification popped up on my screen. It was an official email from Marcus, sent from his corporate account to my personal address. His panic had fully metastasized into blind, irrational rage. The email was a frantic, poorly written threat. He formally accused me of intentional system sabotage prior to my termination and explicitly threatened to launch a massive corporate lawsuit against me if I did not immediately return and fix the network. He thought he was intimidating me into compliance. He had no idea he had just handed me the ultimate weapon. I smiled, clicked the forward button, and sent the entire threatening email directly to my labor attorney with a simple note attached. "Save this for the retaliation file." Exactly 1 week after my forced exit, at 8 o'clock on Friday morning, the quiet sanctuary of my apartment was interrupted by a sharp, persistent ringing. I glanced at my phone. The screen displayed a private, unlisted number. I let it ring 4 times before finally answering. "This is Chloe," I said, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. "Chloe, please do not hang up. It is Julian Vance." The name hung in the air, shifting the entire dynamic of the morning. Julian Vance was the vice president of operations. He was Marcus's direct boss, a seasoned executive who commanded boardrooms with a booming voice and an iron fist. But the voice coming through my speaker right now was not the voice of a titan of industry. It was thin, breathless, and laced with absolute terror. He sounded like a man standing on the edge of a very high cliff, realizing the ground was crumbling beneath his expensive leather shoes. "I am listening, Julian," I replied, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "We have a massive situation, Chloe. A catastrophic situation," Julian began, his words tumbling out in a rushed, frantic rhythm. "The East Coast Hospital rejected the entire biological shipment on Wednesday, but they did not just send it back. The hospital administration escalated the issue immediately. They filed a critical incident report with the Food and Drug Administration. The FDA is not just asking questions, Chloe. They are threatening to issue a federal injunction by the end of the business day. They want to freeze our entire national transport network, pending a full-scale federal investigation into our safety protocols. He paused, clearly struggling to catch his breath. The arrogance of corporate America had completely evaporated, replaced by the crushing weight of federal oversight. That sounds like a severe operational failure, I said smoothly, offering absolutely zero comfort. But as Marcus reminded me last week, I am no longer part of the operations team. Chloe, listen to me, Julian pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. Marcus came to my office yesterday evening in an absolute panic. He told me everything. He said you were angry about the artificial intelligence restructuring. He claims you planted a malicious logic bomb in our central servers right before you handed over the administrative keys. He said you intentionally sabotaged the sensor network to trigger a failure out of spite. I am not calling to threaten you with a lawsuit. I am begging you. Tell me what the kill code is. Tell me how to remove the malware so we can show the FDA that our systems are clean. We can handle this quietly. We can make it right with you financially. Just tell me how to disarm the virus. I slowly placed my coffee mug on the kitchen counter. The sheer audacity of Marcus's lie was almost impressive. To cover his own disastrous incompetence, he had constructed a fantasy where I was a vengeful cyber-terrorist. He had manipulated Julian into believing this was a simple case of corporate sabotage. Julian, I said, my voice dropping to a low, razor-sharp pitch that cut right through his panic. I want you to listen to every single word I am about to say, and I want you to understand it completely. I did not plant a virus. I did not install malware. I did not leave a logic bomb in your servers. Then why did the entire thermal firewall collapse the second Marcus tried to run a dispatch? Julian practically yelled, his desperation peaking. Because the system did not crash from an attack. Julian, it stopped working because Marcus stopped paying for it, I explained coldly. The core temperature prediction algorithm, the absolute brain of your entire cold chain network, is not a piece of software Aerovax's owns. It is a proprietary mathematical framework that I co-authored and patented with an independent research firm 5 years ago. Aerovaxis did not own the code. The company simply leased it through an annual enterprise license. I could hear dead silence on the other end of the line. Just the faint sound of Julian's ragged breathing. I continued, driving the nail deeper. When Marcus took over, he reviewed the departmental budget. He saw a massive 6-figure line item for an external software license. In his blind rush to hit his 45% cost reduction target, he assumed it was just some overpriced, redundant subscription. So, he canceled the financial renewal. Furthermore, he explicitly ordered his new tech team to rip out the licensing verification modules to force the system to run on his friend's cheap, unverified shell program. He essentially unplugged the brain of your safety network to save a few dollars. My God, Julian whispered, the horrifying reality finally sinking in. He canceled the license. Yes, I confirmed. But the financial loss is not your biggest problem right now. Julian, your biggest problem is the law. When Marcus manually bypassed the safety warnings on Monday and forced that dispatch, he was not just delivering spoiled goods. By running highly regulated medical transports on an unlicensed, unverified, and intentionally altered software architecture, Aerovaxis actively falsified federal compliance logs. You did not just lose $40 million in product. Your company has just committed federal medical data fraud. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I could practically hear the gears turning in Julian's head as the true scale of the disaster materialized before him. He was no longer thinking about a missed delivery or a temporary setback. He was looking down the barrel of a federal indictment. He was realizing that Marcus, the golden boy hired through boardroom nepotism, had not executed a brilliant 45% budget cut. Instead, Marcus had single-handedly orchestrated a catastrophe that was about to evaporate hundreds of millions of dollars in company valuation, destroy their corporate reputation forever, and potentially send several top executives, including Julian himself, to a federal penitentiary. Chloe, Julian finally breathed out, his voice utterly broken, devoid of any corporate authority. He sounded like a defeated, terrified old man. "What have we done?" "Chloe, I am begging you," Julian pleaded over the line, his voice stripped of its usual commanding resonance. "I am creating a new position for you. Senior Executive Consultant. We will pay you 3 times your previous salary. Effective immediately. I will give you a massive signing bonus. I do not care what the financial cost is anymore. I just need you to come back. Interface directly with the Food and Drug Administration investigators. Reinstate the algorithm license. And figure out a way to keep my executive board out of federal prison." I listened to the hollow desperation in his voice. For 11 years, these men had treated my department like an annoying financial burden. Now, they were willing to empty the corporate treasury just to buy back the safety net they casually discarded. "I am not stepping foot inside the Aerovaxis building ever again, Julian," I said, my tone absolute. "However, I will agree to a brief meeting, today, exactly at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. We will meet at the Independent Coffee Roaster down on State Street. And there is one strict condition for this conversation. Marcus must be sitting right next to you." "We will both be there," Julian promised instantly, abandoning any instinct to protect his subordinate. When I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the cafe right at noon, the contrast between my demeanor and theirs was comical. The coffee shop was filled with the vibrant hum of downtown Chicago on a Friday afternoon. Baristas were grinding espresso beans, and professionals were laughing over lunch. Yet, in the back corner booth, a dark cloud of impending doom seemed to isolate Julian and Marcus. I walked over, my posture perfect, carrying nothing but a thick black leather briefcase. Julian looked as though he had aged 10 years since our last board meeting. His face was ashen, and his hands were trembling as they clutched a cooling cup of coffee. Next to him, Marcus looked entirely broken. The tailored suit he wore seemed to hang loosely on his shoulders. He was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a crumpled paper napkin, and aggressively avoiding my gaze. I slid into the booth and calmly rested my hands on the table. "Gentlemen," before Julian could even open his mouth. Marcus cracked under the pressure. He started frantically stammering, desperately trying to salvage his constructed lie. "Chloe, you have to tell him the truth," Marcus blurted out, his voice shrill. "Tell Julian there was a catastrophic hardware malfunction on your end. Tell him the server racks were failing before you left. You know the legacy hardware could not handle the new artificial intelligence deployment. It was a structural failure, right? It was a pathetic effort to construct a new reality, where he was not the architect of his own destruction." I did not raise my voice. I simply unlatched my leather briefcase and pulled out a heavily bound stack of documents. "This," I announced, sliding the heavy file across the wooden table toward Julian, "is the official termination handover protocol." Julian slowly opened the folder, his eyes widening as he scanned the first page. "You will notice the signatures at the bottom of page 3, I instructed coldly. "That is the signature of the head of human resources, and right next to it is your signature. Marcus, that legal document explicitly verifies that upon my departure at 4 o'clock last Friday, the entire cold chain logistics network was operating at exactly 100% capacity. There were 0 hardware faults, 0 software errors. You legally signed a document confirming the system was perfect when you took control of it." Marcus turned completely pale, his mouth opening and closing silently. He had been so eager to kick me out that he had blindly signed the compliance paperwork without reading it, unknowingly destroying his own hardware failure defense. "But that is not the most important piece of paper in that folder. Julian," I continued, my voice carrying lethal precision. "Turn to page 12. Julian flipped through the stack, staring at a brightly highlighted spreadsheet of raw server data. "My labor attorney filed a rapid legal discovery motion early this morning in response to the threatening email Marcus sent me," I explained smoothly. "What you are looking at is a certified, legally obtained snapshot of the administrative action logs from Monday morning. Read the highlighted timestamp out loud." Julian swallowed hard, his voice a raspy whisper. 8 o'clock in the morning, Monday. "Exactly," I smiled, a cold, ruthless expression. At exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning, the master administrative account belonging to Marcus manually executed a command to permanently disable the external licensing verifications and forcefully dismantle the security firewall. I did not plant a virus. The hardware did not fail. Your newly promoted manager intentionally tore down the security infrastructure of a federally regulated network just so he could push a button faster. Julian slowly turned his head to look at Marcus. It was the terrifying, hollow stare of a man looking at a convicted felon. Julian finally realized the horrifying scope of the situation. Marcus was not just profoundly useless. In his desperate attempt to cover up his monumental stupidity and shift the blame onto me, Marcus had actively falsified internal compliance reports and lied to a corporate officer during a federal emergency. He had committed blatant document forgery to hide his own catastrophic negligence. The illusion of corporate hierarchy was completely dead. The vice president and the arrogant manager were nothing more than two terrified men trapped in a cage of their own making, and I held the only key. Julian stared at the documents, his breathing shallow. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and produced a thick, freshly printed legal binder. He pushed it across the wooden table with a trembling hand. It was the senior executive consulting agreement he had promised during our phone call. The numbers printed on the first page were staggering, offering me a base salary 3 times higher than what I had earned just a week prior, along with an immediate, unconditional signing bonus. "Please, Chloe," Julian whispered, completely ignoring the destruction of his manager sitting next to him. "Just sign the paper. Name whatever terms you want. We will reinstate your algorithm license today. You are the only person who can explain the technical architecture to the federal investigators and prove this was the action of a rogue employee, not a systemic corporate failure." I looked down at the lucrative contract. A week ago, I might have felt a brief spark of vindication seeing those numbers, but now, they just looked like a desperate bribe from a sinking ship. I placed my index finger on the smooth edge of the binder and gently pushed it right back across the table. "I decline," I said softly, but with absolute finality. "My faith in Aerovax's solutions and his leadership has been entirely exhausted. You do not value expertise. Julian, you only value it when your own survival is at stake." Julian's face crumpled in despair, but before he could launch into another frantic negotiation, I decided it was time to end the game completely. "There is another reason I cannot legally sign a consulting contract with your company," I stated, leaning back against the leather booth. "Early this week, while Marcus was busy destroying your infrastructure, I was busy fielding phone calls. As of Wednesday morning, I officially accepted a new position. I am the newly appointed Chief Operating Officer." Julian blinked, completely confused. "Chief Operating Officer? Where?" I smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "At the East Coast Medical Network, the exact same hospital system that rejected your ruined cargo." The color drained entirely from Julian's face. Marcus, who had been staring blankly at the table, suddenly snapped his head up, his eyes wide with pure horror. "Yes," I continued, letting the absolute gravity of the situation crush them both. "When the hospital's receiving team discovered the massive temperature failure, they brought the data directly to me. My very first executive decision in my new role was to formally advise the hospital board of directors to immediately file a comprehensive, unredacted violation report against Aerovaxis with the Federal Oversight Committee. I did not just watch you fail. I am the one who locked the doors and called the authorities." The silence that followed was deafening. The ambient noise of the coffee shop seemed to fade away entirely. Julian slowly turned his head to look at Marcus. The fear in the vice president's eyes vanished, replaced instantly by a blinding volcanic rage. The realization that Marcus had not only ruined the company, but had directly handed their most powerful weapon to the very woman he had wrongfully terminated, pushed Julian completely over the edge. Julian slammed his fist down on the table, rattling the coffee cups. "You are done!" he roared at Marcus, entirely abandoning his polished corporate persona. Patrons at nearby tables turned to stare, but Julian did not care. "You are fired. Effective this exact second, you are completely stripped of all your vested corporate stock options. When the federal investigators finish with you, I am going to have the corporate legal team sue you into absolute, permanent bankruptcy. You will never work in logistics again. Marcus was hyperventilating. His arrogant, untouchable facade had melted away. Leaving behind a terrified boy, he turned his panicked eyes toward me, practically leaping across the table, his hands clasped together in prayer. "Chloe, please," Marcus begged, tears actually welling in his eyes. "You have to call your hospital board. You have to tell them to withdraw the federal complaint. I will lose everything. I will go to federal prison for the data logs. Please, just tell them it was a misunderstanding." I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from my coat. I picked up my leather briefcase and looked down at the miserable creature who had tried to throw me away to save a few budget dollars. "You once sat across from me and said I was too expensive," I told him, my voice ringing clear and cold over the quiet murmurs of the cafe. "You said you wanted a cheaper alternative. I hope you now understand exactly how incredibly expensive cheap can truly be." I turned my back on them and walked toward the exit. As I pushed open the heavy glass doors, a rush of crisp Chicago air washed over me. I stepped out onto the busy sidewalk, leaving two ruined men sitting in the smoldering wreckage of their own arrogant decisions. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in 11 years, I felt completely and utterly free. Several months later, the skies over Seattle were a familiar, comforting gray. I sat behind a massive oak desk in my new corner office, watching the gentle rain hit the floor-to-ceiling windows. My new team treated me with absolute respect, valuing my expertise as the absolute foundation of our entire operation, rather than just a line item on a budget spreadsheet. My computer chimed with a news alert. I opened the financial notification. The headline read that Aerovax's Solutions had officially filed for partial corporate bankruptcy in the wake of massive federal fines and the complete loss of their major hospital contracts. They were liquidating half their assets just to stay afloat. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, took a slow sip of my perfectly brewed dark roast coffee, and smiled. I finally understood that your true worth is never determined by the people trying to buy you at a discount. Thank you so much to all our incredible listeners for joining us for today's story. We would absolutely love to know where in the world you are tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below. As we mentioned at the beginning, we will not be uploading any new videos to this YouTube channel in the foreseeable future. If you found today's story entertaining and want to support our team, we kindly ask that you transition over to our Patreon community. That is where we will be posting all of our upcoming, exclusive true stories, which are far too detailed and intense for public platforms. You can easily join by scanning the QR code right here on the screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the video description and pinned comment. Thank you again, and we cannot wait to see you over there.